All right, we are live. This is Dr. Michael Kaye from the Center for Functional Health, and tonight I have the honor of interviewing Danielle Zies. She is a certified nutritional practitioner and a lifestyle coach. We're going to cover a lot of great topics tonight, from Korea to adrenal fatigue to stress to burnout. So welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule and speaking with me tonight. So let's start off the bat. If you can give us some background and tell us what a certified nutritional practitioner is and a lifestyle coach.
Yeah, I'd love to. And thank you for having me. It's so fun. It's so fun to be here. And so a nutritional practitioner is somebody who looks at it's also sometimes we call ourselves like a holistic nutritionist. Sometimes I'll call myself that. So it's looking at your whole body and figuring out what your body needs in terms of nourishment. So really looking at what the root level needs are when it comes to food, when it comes to nutrients. And I like to call myself a total body nutrition. So it's more than just food. And this is where the lifestyle coaching kind of comes in, because it's more than just the foods that we eat, but it's also like the foods that we are feeding our brain, so our thoughts as well. And so the whole lifestyle approach is really tying in, yes, general nutrition, but also nourishing our life in a really holistic way from our head to our toes. And that includes our mindset and the way that we just live in our day-to-day lives.
Gotcha. Because a lot of times when people think about, nutrition, they just think like nutrition and weight loss, right? That's the first thing that pops in their mind. But, there's more than just weight loss. It's how we feel, how we think. Because, with you and I see patients that get that brain fog, they get the low energy, their joints ache, and they don't even think this is even related to what they're eating. So yeah. It's great that you can expand on, it's more than just like, I need to lose weight. And especially as we are moving closer to summer, that's what everybody thinks on, I got to look good, for the beach. But especially now with the pandemic, being healthy and what we eat is more important now than ever. It was always important, but it really plays a strong role now. So when I had the opportunity to look at your website, I was really blown away by the fact that you spent time in Korea. So yeah. You were the first person I was speaking to who actually spent time in Korea. Could you tell us how that came about?
Yeah, it was one of those things. I'm such a homebody. I never really thought I would move so far away from home. But my boyfriend, he has a brother who has been in Seoul, Korea for probably close to 10 years now. And his brother has always been sharing how wonderful the experience was and what a great opportunity it is to just see the world. And when we went, we taught English. And so it was kind of a crazy experience for me to leave my day job. We found homes for our pets with other family members. We sold all of our stuff. It was a crazy experience just getting there and making that decision. But we just decided it was kind of one of those now or never things. My boyfriend had always wanted to go, and we just decided, let's just do it now. Let's just go for it. So we took the plunge, and we were planning on just going for a year. We ended up staying for 2 full years in Korea. And then we had planned this really fun summer of travel. Then that's COVID great. Kind of got in the way. And that's another long story for maybe another day. We got locked down in Malaysia. It was a very wonderful and delicious experience, and then had to abandon our travel plans and come back to Canada. But hopefully going back to Korea soon, because I actually left a bunch of suitcases there at my boyfriend's brother's place. So it was a crazy, fun, delicious experience.
Well, the pictures I've seen of Malaysia look absolutely beautiful.
I feel like it's so underrated when we think of traveling in Southeast Asia. It was just gorgeous, and the food there is just incredible.
So let's talk a little bit about food and culture, because at least here in the States, it's eat to be full. There's a lot of processed foods, and obviously there's a lot of cardiometabolic disease. So when you're in these other countries, what is their approach to food, and what is their prevalence of cardiometabolic disease compared to at least here in the States or in Canada?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to be honest, I haven't looked into the stats of how it differs, but just from what I saw day to day with even just the robustness of their seniors, and even looking at the stats when we look at COVID cases and COVID deaths in Korea, and just the difference from what we saw in the West here, it's pretty significant. And I would just call them robust. And I think health is a little bit more of a priority, especially when I look at the traditional Korean diet, which is starting to, I mean, it still has its traditions and cultures, of course, but that westernized food is starting to become more prevalent there as well. So you can definitely see the impact of that infiltrating the younger generations. But when you look at the seniors and you've seen them living on the more traditional Korean diet, which is pretty healthy, like fermented foods at most meals, the rice, like really big focus on vegetables. It was one of my like first months in Korea, and hiking is a big thing in Seoul. So on the weekends, lots of people get out. It's actually a lot more mountainous than you'd think. And I was struggling. We were like going up this mountain, and it was even a little bit hard for me. And I just hear like ding, 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 ding behind me. And it was this group of older men on bikes, and they were biking up the mountain.
Nice.
Like it was nothing. And I was just so impressed.
That's pretty cool. So before we go into the nitty gritty of what we're going to talk about tonight, what were your favorite dishes in Korea, your favorite dish in Malaysia?
Yeah, my favorite in Korea, and this is just like one of their most famous comfort food dishes, is called kimchi jjigae, or it's a kimchi stew. It was one of the first dishes I tried in Korea, but essentially it's just like a cooked kimchi, which is the fermented cabbage, but it takes a lot of the like pungency out. So it's like the sour, sweet, spicy stew with a couple other vegetables and usually some beef or some meat, and you eat it with rice on the side, and it's just so warming and comforting and delicious. It was my favorite.
And in Malaysia?
Oh, that one is tough because everything is so good. I would have to say they have a really traditional breakfast. It's called nasi lemak, and it's like a spicy rice. What's a rice with coconut rice with a spicy sauce? And it might surprise you, but they have these like fried anchovies they get like really crunchy, but they sprinkle them on top with like a couple nuts, and there's an egg with it, and you just kind of eat it all together. And it's just like this really delicious combo of spicy and crunchiness and also sweet and just ricey and delicious. So good. It was really good. Yeah. If you ever see it on a menu somewhere locally, you should give it a try. It's called nasi lemak.
Nasi lemak. All right, very cool. I'll have to look at that one. Love all those things. Big anchovy fan.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into it. So adrenal fatigue. Let's talk about that. I mean, I have a lot of patients that come in and they are wiped.
Yeah.
They're already past that burnout. They didn't even recognize the stages of the burnout. You know, it was just go, especially the moms that come in. You know, it's something we gotta do. You know, we take care of the kids. I got to work out. I got to take care of the house. You know, and single parents, both mom and dads, it doesn't really matter gender-wise. I mean, they're both very tired. So let's, if we can we touch on what is adrenal fatigue? What do you believe adrenal fatigue actually occurs? Do you believe the adrenal organs are not working? And what are the stages? How do we prevent burnout?
Yeah, I love this question, and I could go down many wormholes with this one. So it was a loaded question. But when it comes to what is adrenal fatigue, a lot of people, you'll realize that it's not medically defined. So depending on who you're talking to, some people will believe in it full-heartedly because they've experienced it, and other people might kind of brush it off like there's not science there. So I like to kind of clarify what I mean when we're talking about adrenal fatigue. And so the way it's more recognized medically is hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis dysfunction. And that's a bit of a mouthful. And so where I'm really coming from when I'm saying adrenal fatigue is more thinking about burnout. And so if fatigue and stress and just not feeling like your most vibrant, energized self, like if you're not feeling like yourself and you're struggling with stress, then that's kind of what I would envelope adrenal fatigue in. And like you mentioned, there's a couple different stages, and those stages have different faces that we can see through testing. So we can definitely go through them. But I do believe it exists, but not in the sense that the adrenals stop working. Often it's a communication issue between that pathway, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And it's not like the adrenals just shut down and stop doing their job in most cases. Like 99% of the case is. It's more of a communication thing, and it's more to do with just living with chronic stress day to day, and that stress eventually taking such a toll on our body that we're not able to function at the level that we used to anymore. And the way the scale to get there, I mean, it's going to vary from person to person, but there is a scale, and it goes from just kind of being high level stressed. And I guess this is where we can get into the stages, like the earlier stages of adrenal fatigue tend to be where we're more wound up. So things are a little bit more elevated. And I think that in this stage, we would call it the alarm stage. In this stage, we kind of get used to living there because those symptoms of this stage are just so common. It's like anxiety, it's feeling pretty wired. We might feel tired, but we have trouble relaxing. And in this stage, we're just kind of tired but wired, but we're still pushing, and we still kind of have the energy to keep pushing, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what we see a lot of, it's like we have to keep going, right? Because there's a lot to do. There's 24 hours in a day. We got to use it all. So, I find that often the oil light comes on in the car, and, people are just not paying attention to it. They'll put a Band-Aid on. That Band-Aid could be, for their energy, I'm going to have, a cup of coffee instead of really trying to get back some of the energy, right? So a lot of times people think they can bank sleep, but they can't bank sleep. So the first stage is that alarm stage, like you say. What is the next stage?
So the next stage, depending on who you're talking to, there might be 3 to 5 stages, but let's just assume we'll just do the 3 stages to kind of keep things simple. So then we move into the resistance stage. And so this is where we might start to feel a bit of a slowdown, and we start to feel the fatigue starts to creep in a little bit more. I find that people more in that alarm stage, this isn't always often where people are seeking help from me. Maybe with in your practice, it might be a little bit different, Dr. Michael, because people might be feeling that like muscle tension. They might be feeling a little bit more physical pain and that physical wound up experience. But when it comes to getting support from a nutrition side of things, people are generally not there yet until they start to get more of that fatigue creeping in, which we start to see in the 2nd and 3rd stages.
Right. Now, when we do like our review of systems, I mean, one of the obvious questions is, do you feel fatigue, right? So often that's checked off, right? Very rarely do you have somebody who doesn't check off fatigue, especially now more than ever, right? So fatigue from on so many levels. I mean, if you want to call it, we have a social fatigue now, right? We have social isolation fatigue. We have that, social fatigue where they're spending too much time on social media. We have all these different kinds of fatigue that we can classify. And I don't care which way you want to come in, the cortisol levels become affected. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%.
If you can explain to the audience, what is cortisol, how it works for us and also against us.
Yeah. And so cortisol is one of the most popular stress hormones that we hear a lot about in online and such. And it's one of those hormones that we really have a love-hate relationship with it. And I feel like it's a relationship that we just really, truly have to respect, because the stress state is one that can save your life. And so cortisol is that hormone that typically is its highest point is in the morning. So waking you up in the morning, your cortisol would be higher. And then throughout the day, it kind of trickles down. In the evening time, generally that would be your lowest point when your cortisol is hitting the lower point in the day. And your melatonin on the reverse side is higher. So your melatonin raises in the evening, cortisol is low, and then they kind of fluctuate in a figure 8 sort of way throughout the day. And so cortisol, I mean, it's so important, and we need it to survive, and it's so important for so many different things. One of my favorite things to share is it's one of the greatest natural anti-inflammatories that our body can call on. So when we have a lot of inflammation going on, that hormonal response, like your body can use your stress hormones to help quench those fires. And so we don't always think about, when we're really living in an inflamed state, the burden that puts on the HPA axis that I was mentioning earlier. But there's so many wonderful things that it does for us. But we kind of get caught in a state where we're demanding a lot of that hormone. And over time, as we transcend through these different stages of burnout, this is where we can see that the levels start to just get lower and lower. And it's not that the adrenals just aren't making enough anymore. It's oftentimes disrupted communication between the brain and the adrenals. So the way that your brain is communicating with your endocrine system. And the way that I just like to describe it simply is like it's just kind of everything's become chaotic when it comes to messaging. And when you live in a state of chronic stress, this doesn't just resonate with your stress hormones, but it corresponds with your sex hormones as well. And like the hormones that we use for digestion and or digestive hormones, and also blood sugar. So thinking like insulin as well. So it affects everything.
Right. And one of the complaints I get is, from our female clientele is, I'm wired, I'm tired, and my libido is not there anymore. And we're not talking about a libido of someone who's in their 60s. We're talking about libido of someone who's in their 20s and 30s. And that's when, you should
so
be
common.
Ready, as they say, and they're not. They're tired, and they're tired of trying to keep up.
Yeah.
So cortisol being one of the hormones, what are the other stress hormones out there?
So it depends depending on the different stages that we're in, we'll see different things happening with different hormones. So one that's coming to mind but just off mentioning libido was DHEA and some of these androgens. So in those earlier stages, sometimes we see those androgens spike up a little bit. And then in the more advanced stages, we start to see it coming down. But when it comes to stress hormones, we have we can think of adrenaline and norepinephrine, cortisol, cortisone. So there's different forms of these hormones as well. And so what's cool about different testing that we can do is we can see how these stress hormones fluctuate throughout the day and how your body's able to utilize them. And that can give us like a really good foundation of where to start. If you've been struggling with a lot of fatigue for a while and not feeling like the general foundational stuff that you might be doing is helping you move in the right direction.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about testing. I know the docs in my area, they're not big fans whatsoever of
really?
cortisol testing.
Okay.
Not, right? Because they feel that, if we do a cortisol test at LabCorp, it's a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
Right? So there's, unless you go back 4 times and get stuck, and nobody really wants to do that.
Yeah.
They don't feel like it helps them. So, at the office, we'll look at cortisol levels. We'll look at the cortisol awakening response, and I'm going to hopefully you can talk about that. And, also a Dutch test as well. Mm-hmm. So those are some things that we will look at because I think it's important to look at that hormone panel. So if you can talk a little bit about testing, because I think a lot of times patients read articles on the internet and it's just not giving them that full basis of what they really need to do.
Yeah.
So if you can talk a little bit how important testing actually is, that would be great.
Yeah, I really love this question because I can see where the doctors are coming from with this mindset. And I just like to think that there's a time and a place. So it is just a snapshot, but for those who have been struggling for a long time, and this is an example that I love that I see in practice a lot, is clients will have these dips during the day that kind of feel inexplainable. And so it might be, they're not sure what's going on, but for them, it feels like a moment, like every day around this time, I just get this surge of like panic or anxiety or these shakes. And when you're looking at the normal blood work, it's nothing major or nothing alarming might be presenting. But what's cool in some of these cases when people have been struggling with this for a while is we can look and do this test. And even though it's a moment in time, we might see something that is alluding to a pattern. And so in these cases, we've seen like drops in cortisol, or it might be a spike in cortisol. I find when there is a spike or a drop, then those physical sensations can become really pronounced. So for those people, it's just so empowering to see like, wow, okay, it's actually something hormonal that's been going on all this time. And it's not like that I'm broken or that it's something that it just gives you that clarity that this is what might be alluding to those symptoms when you're having these kind of attacks. And then it gives you a plan of action when you're working with your practitioner. You can kind of figure out what you're going to do to tackle it. So it can just be so empowering to get that information. But on the other hand, you're right, it is a moment in time. And I find that it keeps a lot of people stuck. Like in the work that I do, working with people with a lot of adrenal fatigue and a lot of burnout, some people get so fixated on, well, what stage am I in? and it kind of halts them from taking the steps forward, because they're thinking about, well, what supplement should I take for stage 2, or what supplement should I take for stage 3? And it can almost become so overwhelming and complicated that it can keep you stuck. And it always just comes back to the foundations, because regardless of how many of these tests that I've seen, like our foundations, and this just gives everybody a little bit of hope and makes things a little bit more simple, but coming back and just addressing these pillars of health that are foundational for all of us, like healthy sleep, healthy food, our mindset, exercise, just all of these things that contribute to good health. If we come back and look at those foundations and start addressing them and chunk it down bit by bit and make those foundations stronger, then whatever is happening on the Dutch test, this is going to be supportive for whatever is happening on that hormone test. Would you agree?
I agree. And again, we even see this with our irritable bowel patients, right? I mean, follow the low FODMAP, do absolutely wonderful, right? They'll take whatever, GI supplements they need to get, and maybe a good probiotic, maybe we take them off the probiotic, maybe we'll put them on some, a GI response kind of, supplement, and they do wonders. But then they reach this plateau, and then it's like, what's going on? And then we start dialing in on sleep, dialing in on not watching the news anymore, dialing in on getting the right exercise, so the right exercise is really important. What everybody thinks the right exercise is, it may not be, because we have like a lot of our, females that come in who are, doing triathlons, and they feel they're fit, but they're burned out. So they run they do a wonderful triathlon, but they're weight.
Yeah,
right? So,
that was totally me. That was like
so
one of the big factors that contributed to me just totally crashing out all the hormones.
Right. So, but that wasn't the goal, right? The goal was like, wow, I really like this. I like this kind of event. I like running. I like swimming. I like bicycling. It's absolutely wonderful. However, in the end, I'm not really healthy. So maybe we can talk about that. What was that like in your journey? I mean, if you were doing all that kind of stuff and you didn't feel great, can you share about that?
Yeah, I'd love to, because I've always been interested in health, but this was before I studied nutrition and really knew the things that I should be doing, because I thought everything was supportive. So I loved running, and that was my stress relief, right? Like I would go for these big long runs multiple times a week. At the time I was eating a vegetarian diet and working my corporate day job, and then like coming home and trying to have a social life and staying up way too late. And the key takeaway is that I was just not fueling myself in a way that I could recover from all of this pressure that I was putting on my body. And so it was just pushing. And eventually I realized I was burning more muscle than I was anything with these runs. I wasn't able to properly repair and recover because I wasn't sleeping well, drinking coffee all day, stimulating all day, and then wondering why I couldn't wind down at night. It was just, I had some big lifestyle changes that I needed to address. But it's hard because a lot of the times you think what you're doing is healthy. Like I thought my smoothies every day for my cold smoothies every day for breakfast, and like raw vegetables and purely vegetarian diet was so healthy. But even as a nutritionist, what I know now, like you have to be on the ball to make sure that you're balancing your macros. Like it's possible, but you just have to be mindful. And I wasn't being as mindful as I should have.
Right.
So in terms of supportive, it wasn't the most supportive diet for me at the time. So I had to make some changes.
That's great. I think I'm a big exercise fan. I train 5 days a week. Obviously, as throughout the years, exercise has changed, and I try to get that to my patients. I tell them that this is a different decade. You're training for the next 5 years. We get a lot of guys who say, my shoulders are killing me. I'm trying to bench press. I'm like, listen, you're a 40-year-old man trying to fit an exercise program like when you were 20 into a 40-year-old body, and it doesn't really work like that. And then on the flip side, I find a lot of my female clientele, they need to lift weights, and they're not doing any type of progressive resistance exercise. And that's the only way we really get strong. We burn up body fat wonderfully, and we lay down calcium wonderfully by doing that. So when we talk about somebody who's in this high rate of, the cortisol is compromised, HPA axis is compromised, what kind of exercise do you recommend they do? How much should they do? And I know everyone's different. So just from a general basis, what do you see? What do you recommend?
So yeah, you're right. This is going to be individual, but one thing that is common, especially if you've been stuck in a state of higher stress for a long time, is that your body might be burning muscle more quickly than you would like. And so it's quite common. So the last thing that you want is muscle loss, right? And so if you're doing a really like high intensity interval training and doing these really long workouts that are really intense, and then your body tends to let you know. So I think that that's a great thing that we can do is kind of get mindful and get intuitive with ourselves and just making some judgments on how you actually feel after your workouts. Like, do you feel energized? Do you feel great? Or do you feel really tired? And does it take you a long time to recover? Because that will be really telling. So when it comes to what is the best exercise, I think a lot of us could probably tone it down if we've been doing high intensity stuff. And just like you said, it's like we need to strengthen the muscles. And also just even like if you're very fatigued, and maybe this kind of goes into a next phase of the question of in the earlier stages when we're really wound up, I feel like a lot of people want to do that intense exercise to kind of help release some of those feelings. So I understand why people would feel called to it, but I think there just has to be some yin to your yang, right? So not always pushing. And it's not that you have to stop it completely. Like for example, with me, I do love running and I still run, but I had to stop doing the big long distance runs and started doing shorter, quicker runs. And at times I just took breaks from running and just focused on Pilates and yoga and more weight bearing stuff. So it's really going to be dependent on you, but as we progress into the more advanced stages, when you feel that fatigue, I find a lot of people aren't doing the high intensity stuff anymore just because physically they can't tolerate it. And so it's not that you want to stop completely either, because some people will take that almost as, well, I can't exercise, but exercise is still a really supportive thing for your body, supportive for so many reasons. So you don't want to eliminate it from your routine completely. It's more just tweaking it and adjusting it to be more nutritive and nourishing for your body rather than stressful.
Right. And I find that those who have that, inverse relationship with their cortisol, that the exercise is shorter and it doesn't fatigue them out as much. So we'll, make sure there's a great warm up, obviously joints, ligament, tendons, fascia. And then, a focused area of movement pattern for a specific period of time and where they don't feel wiped out so they can come back the next day or the day after and do it again.
Yeah, that's great advice.
The hardest thing to change is the runner. I mean, yeah. It's as you know, it's a mindset, right? It's a definite mindset. It's like telling somebody who does CrossFit, like, hey, listen, the shoulder joint can't handle it anymore. We got to move into a different kind of workout.
Yeah.
In the martial arts world, it was with certain techniques in martial arts like Taekwondo, a lot of end joint movement patterns. So we see a lot of elbows, shoulder, knee problems, and we try to move them more into like an Aikido. It's a different kind of stress, but you still get to work out. So, it's finding that right type of, not, I won't say substitute, but right type of movement they can do that allows them to exercise so they can come back again. Yeah. When we talk about exercise, and everybody asks me this, I'm sure as a nutritionist, they ask you this as well. Listen, what kind of protein drink should I drink? I want to get I want to get a good protein drink, and they often ask that. And I think protein drinks are great, but boy, I try to get it, through food is where I want to get the protein from. So when you're dealing with somebody that has this inverse relationship to cortisol, it's when it should be up, it should be down, and when it's down, it should be up. What do you recommend them food-wise? And can you talk a little bit about like what is your feeling on protein drinks?
Yeah. So when it comes to food, I really like, my whole premise is Simply Nourished as nutrition. So really keeping things simple and creating a lifestyle out of it. So of course, there's going to be scenarios where maybe we need to get a little intense for a little bit, like a little bit more therapeutic if we're working on something specific and if you've really been struggling. But when it comes to food, it's just thinking about fatigue and burnout in general and just knowing that your body is depleted and shifting to a focus where food is fuel and you're really just thinking about nourishing yourself back up and what that's going to look like for you. So again, we have good instincts. So if we look at what we've been eating, leading up to this burnout, we might know that there's some things in there that maybe are creating more stress than it's worth, or, maybe we feel that when we eat, or there's things that we should remove or add more of. So I always recommend with just starting simply with the thing that that you should be doing. And if you need support, that's the type of support I love to help people with, making it simple, making it a lifestyle without it being so overwhelming, because there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise on the internet that can make it feel really overwhelming. But just starting thinking about deep nourishment with quality whole foods, colorful whole foods is really where I think the foundation starts, and we can go from there.
Well, I think, and you can talk about this, it's hard. It can be difficult when I'm the only one in the house that's trying to eat healthy. So what do you tell your clients? Do you see more female than male?
Yeah, generally more female. Not exclusively, but
what do you tell your female client, who often, is the one responsible for cooking at home? Sometimes, the husband will cook and the significant other will cook, and all that kind of stuff is great. But usually, they're the ones, feeding everybody else, and, kids want snacks, and, the husband wants this, and here you are trying to maintain, a certain nutritional lifestyle. How do you handle that?
That can be hard. And I have some clients with big families, and it's just not financially feasible for everybody to be eating these super paleo diets, and the kids aren't into that. So I totally get this question. And so I think it's kind of about picking your battles and picking what the big thing is for you. And again, this is going to be an individual thing. So if it's something where you need to go a little bit more paleo for a while, then it's just kind of having maybe a little substitute that you can just whip up quickly and easily for yourself. But you can create really simple, nourishing meals for the whole family, and then just maybe having one little swap on the side that could be something to do for what you're trying to do. But it can be difficult. And I've lived this myself too, because my boyfriend is my most challenging nutrition client, because he's stubborn and he loves to junk out. And so there's a lot of delicious things that aren't always in alignment with what I want to be eating. So I like to encourage people to, if you're in that situation, it's really about leading by example. Because when your partner sees you feeling like your best self and really thriving, then that becomes a little bit contagious. Hopefully it becomes contagious. That would be the goal. But it's really knowing what you're working for and knowing that you deserve to feel like your best self, and then just kind of seeing what we can do, tweaking it simply with what you're working with your family and partner. But it's a challenge, but it's definitely workaroundable.
Okay. And you're feeling on protein drinks? Because people want that quick thing in the morning, and they blend up that quote unquote healthy veggie or fruit laden type of juicy juice. And I always tell them, you might want to skip that. So
yeah. And personally, I don't like the grittiness of protein shakes. So I almost never have them. Occasionally I'll buy them just to have them around every now and then for a little booster. But I do think that there's a time and place. But I think that it's really easy for people to get called to just kind of relying on those for their meals. And it could be great for evening cravings. And I do think there can be a time and place for them if it's a good brand and there's not tons of sugar and tons of additives and icky stuff in there. But whole foods first. Yeah. And
excellent.
I do think they have a time and place.
You brought it up before, that 2:00 slump, where it's oh my God, we're going down.
Yeah.
But I'm going to eat an energy bar, right? I'm going to eat this granola bar. And I always say, we got to get some whole food, right? But if they want something quick, what is your go-to, that mid-afternoon snack? What do you like?
Okay, so I have a couple. And I will say what you have for lunch, I find really affects the severity of that slump. So just being mindful of how big your portion was at lunch and the types of foods you have at lunch, just playing with that can be so cool, because you can notice a really big shift in afternoon energy. Mm-hmm. But it's inevitable. A lot of us are going to feel tired a couple hours after lunch as we start to just have that dip. So the snacks I like to go to lately, I've been having just veggies and some hummus, or like a little bit of apple and almond butter. I love having hard-boiled eggs around too. Hard-boiled eggs and maybe like a little bit of sweet potato. That's one of the perks. Like most of us are working at home these days. If you just batch cook, roast a bunch of sweet potatoes and hard boil some eggs, I think that's like the perfect quick snack. And that's one of the tricks I learned in Korea too, because they would actually just leave roasted potatoes and hard-boiled eggs in their shells. In some of the more traditional homes, that they would have them as like a snack on the kitchen table, that they would just leave them out all day.
Really?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And
Yeah,
it was
I love
just like
sweet
delicious
potato. I
snack.
think sweet potato toast is great. You know?
Yeah. With a little bit of like nut butter or a couple blueberries on top is such a good treat.
Sea salt too, right? So, I really do a lot of stuff like I find that people aren't getting enough electrolytes.
Yeah,
so,
that's a big one.
I don't know if you know Rob Wolf. He has a product called Element, LMNT, and it's just got a nice ratio of that sodium to potassium to magnesium.
Oh, okay.
30 ounces of water, and that itself becomes a pick-me-up.
Yeah.
So that works out really well. Of course, pickles. Pickles are a great one. Healthy pickles, I should say.
Yeah.
Not the junky ones in the jar, but good healthy pickles are great as well. So the one thing I want to talk about, or two things I want to touch on right now that's important, are the two S's, and that's sleep and supplements.
Yeah.
But before we go there, I got one more food-related question. But everybody says to fast. I'm supposed to water fast for 4 days. I should do a 24-hour fast, a 12-hour fast. I'm going to live longer if I fast. A lot of crazy talk out there on the internet. So what is your thoughts on fasting?
And this is what just makes it all the more complicated, all of these things that are so hot right now. And I do find there's people who do okay doing the whole intermittent fasting thing. But when it comes to fasting and when it comes to burnout in general, it's not something I generally avoid. And it's just what I said before. Like, we're thinking about your body right now and what got you to this state of burnout, and it's depletion, and it's needing nourishment in so many ways. And I think it's not a time to restrict. It's really a time to use food as fuel, especially if you've been really fatigued. We can work on building your body's resilience up a little bit before doing stuff like fasting. But intermittent fasting too, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it. And I do think that there can be a time and place depending on the person as well. And it might change for you as your hormones and through different seasons of life. But generally, again, restricting when we need nourishment, if that intermittent fasting window is a bit too long, can just be adding more stress than it's worth. And some people just won't feel good on it. So I always say, don't push, just listen to your body. And if you feel like you need a snack, like, it doesn't have to be, nothing's set in stone, right? Like, you're making the rules. So push that fasting window and make your eating window much longer. And then as you build up your strength, you can kind of reassess. But then there's other situations where I think the intermittent fasting can be great. And it's for those people who kind of need that hard line drawn in the sand if they're really having problems with like nighttime eating. And if that nighttime eating is like interfering with their sleep and they're not having too many blood sugar issues. So there are certain situations when I think intermittent fasting can be really beneficial. And it just totally depends on how you feel.
Gotcha.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think everyone's different, right? So
yeah.
For some of the patients, I get 12 hours in, just like, you're fasting for blood work. That's great, right? So, we got some people where I want to make some nutritional changes. And I say, this week, don't change anything. Just eat whatever hell you're eating and just give me the 12 hours. Nobody ever died from fasting for 12 hours, to my knowledge, right? So I think if you can get that in, that's some physiological buy-in to say, just, hey, you know what? You can do it, right? Now, we have those patients who say, listen, I feel better after 10 hours and I eat a little something. Then I failed. I'm like, well, you didn't fail. You got 10 hours without eating, so you did okay. So everybody's a little bit different. But I do notice that as the nutritional profile changes over our program time, it becomes a little bit easier for them to fast.
Yeah.
You notice that, right? So there's this adaptation that begins to occur both physiologically and psychologically as well. And to get the response of, I am clearer in my thinking, I have less brain fog when I'm not eating so much food or so much food over a period of time. So where they get that fast in there, and everybody finds that window that works best for them.
Yeah.
However, the statement of, well, if you fast, it's better for your mitochondria, we have autophagy and all that. And I always thought to myself, well, how are we measuring that? Because I have no way of truly measuring that. So, the fact that you can live longer, how much longer, I think there's so many nuances to it. However, I think if it can be utilized and decrease or manage inflammation, I know it plays a direct result on our stress hormones. It's something that should be considered. You just have to find the window that's right for you.
Yeah, that's truly what it's all about.
Yeah, the big thing is, I think, for me, is like, can you get, I want at least 3 or 4 hours done eating before you go to sleep.
Yeah.
That's the big, and to be honest with you, I struggle with that because sometimes I'll get home till 9 o'clock at night and then I don't go to bed till 1 and then I wake up at 6. So,
yeah,
that's not enough time to sleep. So when you don't get enough sleep, that begins to affect you as well. So let's talk about how do we sleep better and how does sleep affect cortisol?
Yeah. So this is a big one. It can be almost like a double-edged sword because our hormones can be impacting our sleep, and then our lack of sleep is kind of making the hormonal picture worse. So people can get really frustrated and it can become a really anxiety-inducing thing if we're not sleeping well. So we need sleep for so much rejuvenation and repair, and it's so important for healthy hormones. And when we are underslept, we're just kind of waking up in a state of almost physical stress already. And it just really perpetuates. So when it comes to getting better sleep, there's a lot of things that we can do. And I think one of the big ones is like the nighttime device use or device addiction in general. Like a lot of us going to bed with our devices and playing games. And if we do wake up in the night, I do find with a lot of my clients, like waking up in the night can be problematic. And a lot of, when your stress hormones and when your hormones in general are kind of out of whack, you might struggle with the sleep side of things, like I said. But then you wake up and you're right away thinking that you might not fall back asleep. So you grab your phone and then that blue light is hitting your face. And then it's almost like you've just kind of stimulated this like second wave. And if you had just like not grabbed the phone on the way back from the bathroom or just not reached for it and just took a couple deep breaths and just kind of counted your breaths, a lot of the time you can fall back asleep. Mm-hmm. And so I find that we almost have these assumptions around not falling back asleep, and it kind of becomes a thing. And I just think that the devices in the room can make it all the more problematic.
Yeah, I do not have my phone anywhere near me in the room at all. It stays away, another room completely to be charged. Because I know people do pick up their phone in the middle of the night. And I always ask the same question. Was there anything you ever learned? Or was there ever any emergency? Always no.
Yeah.
Nobody ever got anything from it. I mean, it wasn't like, oh my God, this is happening. You don't need to know that information now. So, I'm with you in that respect. I think you got to be really important. Keep no electronics in your room whatsoever. I think that's really important. And then the last question I want to ask you is, as I get it as well, and I'm sure you get it, why can't I just take a supplement? Why can't I just take a supplement, 3 supplements, 5 supplements, and everything go back normal? Or do you like to use supplements?
Wouldn't that be nice? And so I actually worked in a really like big health food store when I was in nutrition school. And I'm like so grateful for this experience because I got to talk to so many people and learn so much about supplements. But I saw people coming in, and this is kind of one of the reasons that got me interested in working on the whole stress side of things, because everybody was struggling with fatigue and so many people were so stressed out buying the best supplements. Like they were buying the most amazing protocols, but they kept coming in and buying them again and again, and they still weren't finding relief. And there's often just, supplements can be so supportive. And again, there's a time and a place for them. And I just recommend working with a practitioner to get like a really solid protocol so that you can kind of step back out of the noise, because there's a lot of shiny objects out there, and those shiny objects can be expensive. And depending on what's going on hormonally, and I don't know if you've seen this in practice, but when it comes to the nervous system, like we just want to be careful when we're stimulating, especially if we're already very stimulated. So in some of these energy formulas that we might be tempted to reach for, may actually be pushing us back when we're hoping it will push us forward when it comes to like truly balancing out your body. So in a sense, it becomes like another crutch, like another coffee. And I've actually had clients that I've worked with who are really kind of reliant on their adaptogen formulas that they pick up, because they've gotten to a point where they just really need them to function. But there's something at a root level that hasn't been addressed. And those are often the hard lifestyle pieces. So I'm really all about coming back to the foundations with food and sleep and exercise and using supplements to help really re-strengthen the body. So really it's coming back to like cofactors and essential nutrients to just help build us back up. And there's time and places for different herbs, but it's not the be all end all, and it's not at the forefront as like most people might hope.
Right.
Yeah.
But we have to respect that, right? Because they're usually at their wits' end by the time they come to see us anyway. So
yeah. I totally get it.
Yeah, I mean, they want something, and I fully understand that as well. So how does somebody get a chance to work with you? You know, you have a really cool website. I know you have a lot of programs coming up. You have some coming up for teenagers too, correct?
Yeah, so each month I've been doing different live workshops. This month I'm actually doing a burnout one, which is still running. People can still join and catch the replays. We're doing the second of 5 sessions starting tomorrow. But yeah, each month I have different workshops. And so in May, it's going to be one for empowering teens and teen nutrition. And that's just kind of come to light after talking to more teenagers throughout this pandemic and working with them one-on-one and really seeing how this pandemic has taken a toll on how they're feeling too. So I want to make sure that they're simply nourished and feeling good as well. But when it comes to working with me, I have a 6-month Nourish Simply in 6 months is my program, and we work together, and it's really about creating a lifestyle that's sustainable for the rest of your life. So not only you're getting these incredible results and working through different phases of changing your diet and changing your mindset and just total body nutrition in all the ways, but you're creating a really, really solid foundation with tons of support for the rest of your life and keeping those results long term. So that's all available on my website or on my Instagram at Simply Nourished, simplynourished.ca.
And when somebody works with you over this 6-month time period, is it a weekly thing they work with you, or do you do like a virtual thing with your meeting, like a coaching class? How do you do this?
Yeah, so it's really a one-on-one experience, and we often meet a couple times throughout the month, but essentially it's like unlimited support throughout the week. We can do voice check-ins. So we're working together really closely, which is really important when you're changing your diet and making all of these changes, because for so many years I would just make a protocol and send people home, but the accountability piece is truly where the magic happens when you commit to the plan, and you can build on the plan through different phases, which is what I love doing a bit of a longer program, because we can go through something like really focusing on the gut at the beginning, and then really nourishing the adrenals at the beginning, and then working into something new, which just takes you into a whole new level of feeling incredible and learning so much in the process. It really has to be about education. So that's why I work really closely with people throughout the process. It's like an intimate, very all-encompassing coaching experience.
Nice. I like that. I like that a lot. So thank you so much for hanging with us tonight and sharing all this great information. If you can send me the link for what's coming up so I can add that to this, because we're going to replay this again in our broadcast. So if you can do it, that would be great. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
All right, hang out. Good night, everybody.